Alright, so not for the first time on this channel, I'm having to record while there's some storms going on outside, which means that not only is it overcast, screwing up how much light is making it into this room, making things look weird, but also there may be noise from the storm in the background, so I apologize for all of that in advance. That said, let's talk about the 8th episode of Transformers Prime, Con Job, in which, after a brief reminder of how close Bulkhead and Miko are starting to become, the Autobots pick up an Autobot beacon from a ship en route to Earth. They contact the pilot, and Bulkhead recognizes his voice as Wheeljack, one of his allies and closest friends from his time as part of the Special Forces unit known as the Wreckers. Of course, they want to pick up Wheeljack and bring him back so he can join their team or do whatever it is that he's going to do, and so they relay him landing coordinates well away from their base because their base is still a secret. The Decepticons still don't yet know the location of the Autobot base, and then make plans to ground bridge there to pick him up. But of course, Soundwave intercepts the transmissions, records them, and brings a copy of them to Starscream, and they enact a plan to use this to discover the location of the base. We see in the shadows Soundwave modify one of their own troops to look different, and then they use the coordinates that the Autobots sent to Wheeljack to intercept his ship and attack him. He's handling himself well against the Viacons, but we do cut away, and during that cutaway, they replace Wheeljack with a Decepticon named Makeshift, who's able to mimic the personalities of others. And, I guess with the help of Soundwave, for some reason, the look of them as well. The assumption being that in the very short time during which all of this has been happening, he has done enough research on Wheeljack that he is able to mimic Wheeljack's personality so well that at least for the couple of days that it might take at maximum to figure out where this base is, and or bring his friends in, he can act the part of this person. All of this is confirmed for us in a cutaway to the Decepticons, which, as you guys know, are kind of my favorite part of these episodes so far, in which we also learn that Wheeljack himself is being held captive. They haven't killed him yet, probably because they figure that if this initial plan fails, they can maybe use him as a hostage to get the Autobots to reveal where the base is themselves. But really, at this point, Starscream should have just had him killed outright. It would have been the smarter idea on his part. Because throughout this episode, as Wheeljack and Bulkhead have been interacting, we've been hearing stories about this guy, and he really is a legendary warrior. So of course, he's able to escape. He takes on the entire Decepticon force set to invade the Autobot base once they either get coordinates or Wheeljack is able to open a ground bridge to the Nemesis. And he actually fights through a good deal of them, even doing enough damage to Starscream that he starts bleeding energon from his mouth, before his doppelganger, found out by Bulkhead, because of course it would be Bulkhead. Bulkhead knows him best of anyone, takes a hostage of Miko and uses her as a hostage to get himself to the ground bridge controls, open the ground bridge. He expects reinforcements to be coming through, but Wheeljack has destabilized those reinforcements, and so he's able to jump through the ground bridge first. He takes out his doppelganger and has Bulkhead throw the doppelganger back through the ground bridge to the Nemesis. And this may seem like a really stupid decision because this guy has been to the base. He knows where it is. He just wasn't able to transmit the information because of how shielded the base is. But Wheeljack thought things through. Since the very first moment that we saw Wheeljack, he's had a grenade strapped to his waist. And the law of Chekhov's gun says that if you show a gun in the first act, or a grenade in this case, somebody has to fire it by the end. So during the brief final struggle with Makeshift, Wheeljack triggered that grenade. It goes off on the Nemesis, destroying Makeshift and several Viacons. And the episode ends with Wheeljack deciding that he's not going to stick around. He's actually going to leave now that his ship has been repaired off screen. But Optimus reminds him that he will always have a safe harbor on Earth, so he is going to come back and stick around for a little while here and there from now on. I like this episode a lot. It's super well crafted. First of all, Wheeljack makes for a very effective 6th Ranger-esque addition to this team. There are other characters on this team who are warrior-esque, but none of them are just straight-up warriors, straight-up brawlers and fighters the way that Wheeljack is. Everybody else has something different to their character, but Wheeljack is just that. He's a free-spirited warrior who goes where he feels a call to go and fights people. He's cool and he's charismatic, and I like him a lot, but that's really all the depth to his character that there is. But because he's so likable, that doesn't really hurt his character. It isn't a bad thing that he's like that. It just means that he stands out as being different from the rest of this group. But because he is such an effective fighter, just having him around increases their odds of victory in difficult situations. And even though we didn't follow Wheeljack throughout most of this episode, even though most of Wheeljack's interactions were actually Makeshift playing the part of him, we are told that Makeshift is very, very good at this. So we can assume that the interactions which Wheeljack had again, the first meeting with Optimus, for example, that he would have had again off screen after all this stuff went down, that the Makeshift version of that same interaction would have been accurate to what actually happened. There was good characterization of the kids in this episode, not really character development, but good, solid, consistent characterization, with Miko taking to Wheeljack really, really well right away because he's friends with her friend. Also, there's little shots here and there, like at the end when Wheeljack asks Bulkhead to go with him, and Bulkhead seems to consider it for a second, of, like, Jack puts his hand on Miko's shoulder in preparation of maybe having to comfort her if Bulkhead leaves. That stuff was really subtle and really in keeping with their characterization, but it was all just kind of in the background. No attention was really drawn to it, and I really like that. There were a couple oddities to all of this, like the fact that Optimus wasn't present for the final confrontation with Makeshift because he doesn't hang out with his people, that's just not something he does, so he wasn't there. Where was he? Where did he go? Did he not hear the fighting? It doesn't quite add up, but I still don't mind it because at least it was explained. Then there were some examples of some things that Prime actually does pretty often. There were numerous very small red herrings dropped throughout this episode that didn't really go anywhere. A couple that suggested that this would turn into a jealousy plot, which thankfully it didn't. As well as the scene that I've been showing here where it seems that we're supposed to genuinely fear for Miko's life, which could be foreshadowing for her capture later, but ultimately doesn't go anywhere, and that kind of annoys me. I also think it's odd that they turned Wheeljack into this kind of character. Wheeljack in the original series was a science nerd, a science geek, an engineering geek, almost a mad scientist-esque character. He was nothing like this, and there is no inkling of that character in this one, who is an adaptation of that one. I can think of probably 5 other characters off the top of my head who could have played this role who weren't Wheeljack. And I see absolutely no reason in this character and his characterization for them to name him Wheeljack. It doesn't make sense, because, like, Bulkhead, a character who originated in animated, a version of Bulkhead who actually fought in the Autobot-Decepticon War being a wrecker, makes a lot of sense. But a version of Wheeljack who fought in the Autobot-Decepticon War is the one we got in the original cartoon, and he was not a wrecker. If these are supposed to be offshoots of the same characters from the same multiverse, I want to know what choices led to Wheeljack being this person in this reality. It doesn't gel well with my impressions of the character from other mediums. And this is the only version of Wheeljack who's like this, too. It just seems like such an odd decision to name this character Wheeljack and model him after this Generation 1 character who was so dissimilar to this. I don't know, maybe it was mandated that they call him this and give him this design because somebody wanted to sell a version of Wheeljack's toy or something. But I still think it's very, very weird and does put me off the character a little bit, or at least did when I was watching through this the first time. It didn't this time, I guess. That's probably a good sign. And we do get to see more of Wheeljack later on. This isn't the only time we see him or anything, thankfully, because like I said, he was super likable. Like, when he found out that Starscream's in charge of the Decepticons now, he laughs in Starscream's face, despite the fact that he's in restraints and can't defend himself. That was just... it was perfect. Though, I do have one criticism. Yes, they do tie back to the Scraplets in the previous episode and say that damage to the Scraplets has led to Ratchet wanting to defrag the ground bridge, whatever that means, and so fake Wheeljack is not able to ground bridge out to the Nemesis as early as he'd like to. And that does keep him contained long enough for the plot of this episode to happen. But what I would have liked to have seen is this episode and the previous episode being switched, and the ending of this episode being left off, with Wheeljack deciding to stay at least for a little bit longer, while his ship was actually fixed in an amount of time that makes sense, because in this version of events, it seems like his ship was fixed in less than a day, with no one having worked on it at all. So have him stick around for one episode, place this episode before the Scraplet episode, have the damage to the ground bridge be just regular maintenance stuff, and then put Wheeljack in danger in the Scraplet episode, since he's a new character, one who might be leaving. We have no expectation that he will survive, and it makes that episode more tense. I think it would have worked a lot better, and that's definitely how I would have chosen to write those 2 episodes, how I would have chosen to place them in the lineup. I kind of wish Makeshift hadn't died, too, because he would